Princess Zarath pressed her face against the cold metal bars of her cell. Through the small window she could see her home planet burning. Orange and red flames covered the world where she had been born. The Devourers had come like a plague of metal insects, eating everything alive on her planet. She was the last princess of the Velnari Empire. Her people had ruled the stars for thousands of years. Now they were all dead or running away in old broken ships. The humans had found her floating in space in an escape pod. They could have left her to die, but they brought her aboard their refugee ship instead. The ship was called the New Horizon. It was not a beautiful ship like the ones her people used to build. It was ugly and made too much noise, but it was alive with people who had lost everything, just like her, humans mostly, but also other aliens who had nowhere else to go. Zarath had been in this cell for 3 weeks. The humans did not trust her yet. They fed her and gave her water, but they kept her locked up. She did not blame them. Her people had looked down on humans for years, calling them weak and stupid. Now the humans were the ones still alive while her empire was ash. "You need to work," said the guard who came to her cell that morning. His name was Pete, and he was kinder than the others. "Captain's orders. Everyone works or everyone starves?" Zarath nodded. She had expected this. On a ship full of refugees, everyone had to help. The guard unlocked her cell and led her through the narrow halls of the ship. The walls were covered in pipes and wires that hummed with electricity. Everything smelled like oil and metal and too many people in a small space. They took her to the maintenance deck, deep in the bottom of the ship. The air was hot and full of steam from the engines. Men and women in dirty work clothes were fixing things, cleaning things, and making sure the ship kept flying. Most of them stopped working when they saw her. Zarath knew what they were thinking. She was 7 feet tall with blue skin and silver hair that moved like it was underwater. Her eyes were large and purple, and she had 4 arms instead of 2. To humans, she looked like a monster from their nightmares. "Back to work," said a voice from behind a large machine. "She's here to help, not to be stared at." The voice belonged to a man who came around the machine carrying a toolbox. He was shorter than most humans, with dark hair and tired eyes. His left arm was missing from the elbow down. When he saw Zarath looking at his missing arm, he just shrugged. "Jake Morrison," he said, holding out his right hand. "Welcome to the engine room." Zarath had learned about human handshakes. She reached out with one of her 4 hands and shook his. His hand was rough and strong, covered in old scars from years of working with machines. "I am Princess Zarath of the Velnari," she said. "Nice to meet you, Princess," Jake said. "But down here you're just Zara. We don't have time for titles when the engines need fixing." Some of the other workers laughed, but not in a mean way. Jake showed her around the engine room, explaining how things worked. He spoke slowly and used simple words, but he did not talk to her like she was stupid. He just wanted to make sure she understood. "This is your first job," Jake said, pointing to a pile of metal pipes. "These are dirty and need to be cleaned. Use this brush and this soap. When they're clean, put them in that box over there." It was simple work, but Zarath did not mind. She had never worked with her hands before. On her planet, servants had done everything for her. Now she scrubbed pipes until her hands hurt and her arms were tired. Jake worked nearby, fixing a broken engine part with just his one hand. Zarath watched him work and was amazed. He used tools in ways she had never seen before. He would hold something with his feet while his hand turned a wrench. He moved like he had been born with only one arm. "How do you do that?" she asked during their lunch break. "Do what?" Jake asked, eating his food from a metal tray. "Work so well with only one hand." Jake was quiet for a moment. "You figure it out," he said finally. "When you have to do something, you find a way. That's what humans do." The food was terrible compared to what Zarath used to eat, but Jake shared half of his bread with her anyway. She had not expected kindness from a human, especially one who had his own problems. "Why did you lose your arm?" she asked. "Transport ship crashed," Jake said. "Had civilians on board. Pregnant women, kids, old people. I got them out, but the ship exploded while I was still inside. Doctors couldn't save the arm." "That was brave." Jake shrugged again. "Wasn't brave. Was just what needed doing." That afternoon, some of the other workers were not nice to Zarath. They whispered about her when they thought she could not hear. They said things like alien princess and probably a spy, and why are we helping them when they never helped us? One man, a big human with mean eyes, walked up to her while she was working. "My brother died fighting your people 2 years ago," he said. "You aliens think you're better than us. Now look where it got you. Zareth did not know what to say. She had not killed his brother, but her people had been at war with humans before the Devourers came. She kept cleaning her pipes and did not look up. "I'm talking to you, alien," the man said, getting closer. "Leave her alone, Carl," Jake said, walking over. "She's doing her job." "Don't tell me what to do, cripple," Carl said. "You're as useless as she is." Jake did not get angry. He just stood between Carl and Zareth and looked calm. "Go back to work, Carl. We all have jobs to do." Carl stared at Jake for a long moment, then walked away. Jake went back to his work like nothing had happened. But Zareth noticed that he stayed close to her for the rest of the day. That night, Zareth lay on the thin mattress in her cell and thought about Jake Morrison. The humans called him useless because he had only one arm. They said he had no future because he could not be a soldier anymore. But she had watched him work all day and she had seen him stand up to Carl. Jake Morrison was not useless. He was just different. She thought about her own future. She was the last princess of a dead empire. Her people expected her to rebuild their civilization somehow, but how could she do that when she did not even know how to clean a pipe properly? Through her small window, she could still see her burning planet getting smaller as the ship flew away. Everything she had ever known was gone. But maybe, like Jake said, when you had to do something, you found a way. Maybe being a princess did not matter anymore. Maybe what mattered was learning how to be useful, how to help others, how to keep going when everything seemed hopeless. Maybe what mattered was learning how to be human, even if she was not human at all. 3 weeks passed and things got worse on the New Horizon. More refugee ships had joined them, bringing aliens from 12 different worlds. The humans were scared and angry. Food was getting harder to find. The ship's engines were breaking down more often. People were fighting over everything. Zareth heard the humans talking when they thought she could not understand their language. They blamed the aliens for bringing the Devourers. They said the mechanical monsters only attacked worlds that had aliens on them. Some humans wanted to throw all the aliens off the ships and let them die in space. "It's not true," Jake told Zareth one day while they worked together fixing a water pipe. "The Devourers attacked human colonies too. But people need someone to blame when they're scared." Zareth had learned to trust Jake over the past weeks. He was the only human who treated her like a person instead of a monster or a princess. He showed her how to use tools and fix things. He shared his food with her when the portions got smaller. When other humans stared at her, Jake would find work for them to do somewhere else. "Why are you kind to me?" she asked him. Jake thought about it while he tightened a bolt with his one hand. "My grandmother always said you judge people by what they do, not what they look like or where they come from. You work hard and you don't complain. That's enough for me." But not everyone felt the same way. Carl, the man who hated aliens, had been talking to other humans. He told them stories about how aliens had killed humans in the old wars. He said Princess Zareth was probably sending secret messages to the Devourers, telling them where to find the refugee ships. It was not true, but scared people wanted to believe it. They started looking at Zareth with hate in their eyes. Someone put garbage in her food tray. Someone else wrote mean words on the wall of her cell. When she walked through the ship, people would spit on the ground behind her. Jake noticed and stayed closer to her. But he could not be everywhere at once. The trouble started on a Tuesday. Zareth was working alone in a storage room, counting spare parts for the engines. She heard footsteps behind her and turned around. Carl was there with 5 other men. They had angry faces and carried metal tools like weapons. "Time to go, alien," Carl said. "We're throwing you out the airlock." "Captain Hayes said I could work here," Zareth said, trying to stay calm. "Captain Hayes isn't here," one of the other men said. "And we're tired of feeding enemies while our own children go hungry." They moved closer. Zareth was strong and had 4 arms, but there were 6 of them and they had weapons. She backed against the wall and prepared to fight. At least she would not die without trying. Then Jake appeared in the doorway. "Let her alone," he said. Carl laughed. "Look who's here. The cripple wants to save his alien girlfriend." "She's not my girlfriend," Jake said calmly. "She's a worker, same as us. And she's under the captain's protection." "The captain's not here," Carl said again. "And you can't stop all of us with one arm." "Maybe not," Jake said. "But I can try." He had a wrench in his hand, but 6 men with pipes and hammers were too many. Carl hit Jake in the stomach and he fell down. The other men started hitting him with their tools. Jake tried to protect his head with his one arm, but they kept hitting him. Zareth screamed. The sound was so loud and strange that the men stopped for a moment. She jumped over Jake's body and stood between him and the attackers. Her forearms spread wide and her purple eyes blazed with anger. "You want to hurt him more, you go through me first," she said. The men looked at her long claws and sharp teeth. They remembered that she was an alien who could probably tear them apart. Before they could decide what to do, footsteps came running down the hall. Captain Hayes arrived with 4 security guards. "What's going on here?" the captain demanded. Carl tried to explain, but Captain Hayes was not interested in excuses. She ordered the men arrested and taken away. Then she looked at Jake, who was bleeding from cuts on his head and face. "Get him to the medical bay," she told Zarath, "and stay with him. I want to know exactly what happened here." Zarath helped Jake to the medical bay. The doctor was busy with other patients, so she cleaned Jake's wounds herself. Her people had different bodies than humans, but blood was blood and cuts were cuts. She used water and cloth to wash away the blood and put bandages on the worst places. Jake was awake but hurt badly. His ribs were bruised and his head ached. Zarath sat beside his bed and watched over him. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "You could have been killed." Jake tried to smile, but it hurt his split lip. "Grandmother always said you stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. Even if it costs you something. I could have defended myself. Maybe. But you shouldn't have to. Nobody should have to fight just for existing." Zarath felt something strange in her chest. Her people had words for many emotions, but this feeling was new to her. It was warm and sad and grateful all at the same time. "Tell me about your grandmother," she said. So Jake told her stories while she took care of his wounds. His grandmother had raised him after his parents died in an accident. She had taught him to fix things and work hard and treat people right. She had died just before Jake joined the military. "She would have liked you," Jake said. "She always said people were just people no matter what they looked like." Zarath wanted to tell Jake something in return. She had never told anyone the truth about herself, but he had almost died protecting her. He deserved to know. "I am not just a princess," she said quietly. "I carry something important in my blood. Genetic codes that can rebuild my entire species. If I can find a safe place and the right technology, I can bring back the Velnari people. Millions of lives depend on me staying alive." Jake listened without saying anything. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "That's a heavy thing to carry," he said. "Yes, and I do not know if I am strong enough. I was never trained to rebuild a civilization. I was only trained to look pretty and marry whoever my father chose for me." "You're stronger than you think," Jake said. "I've watched you work. You learn fast and you don't give up. Those are the important things." That night, alarms started blaring throughout the ship. Red lights flashed in the halls and everyone ran to emergency stations. The Devourers had found them. 3 small scout ships were attacking the refugee convoy. Captain Hayes called all hands to battle stations, but the ship was not built for fighting. It was a transport vessel with only basic weapons. The Devourers cut through their shields like paper and started tearing holes in the hull. The main engines went down first. Then the lights went out in half the ship. Emergency power kicked in, but it would not last long. People were screaming and running in the dark halls. Jake got out of his medical bed even though the doctor told him to stay. Zarath followed him to the engine room. It was chaos down there. Pipes were broken and steam was everywhere. The main engineer was unconscious, hit by a piece of flying metal. "I know these systems," Jake said, looking at the damaged engines. "If we can reroute power through the secondary circuits, we might be able to get partial thrust back." He started working with his one hand, moving faster than Zarath had ever seen him move. He crawled through tight spaces and rewired connections while explosions shook the ship around them. Zarath helped by holding tools and following his instructions. "There," Jake said finally. "Try the engines now." Captain Hayes' voice came over the radio. The engines were working again. Not at full power, but enough to move the ship away from the Devourer attack. The refugee convoy escaped into hyperspace just as the alien scouts called for reinforcements. Later, when the emergency was over, Captain Hayes came to find Jake in the engine room. He was sitting on the floor, exhausted and still hurt from his beating. "You saved us," she said. "Without engines, we would all be dead." Jake shrugged like it was nothing special. Just did what needed doing. But Zarath knew better. She had seen something in Jake Morrison that others missed. When everything looked hopeless, he found a way to keep going. When people said something was impossible, he made it work anyway. When everyone else gave up, Jake Morrison kept trying. Maybe that was what made humans special. Not that they were stronger or smarter than other species. But they never knew when to quit. 2 months later, the refugee convoy reached Trader's Rest, a neutral space station where different species met to buy and sell things. It was huge, made of metal rings that spun slowly in space. Ships from dozens of worlds were docked there, and the station's lights made it look like a small city floating among the stars. Captain Hayes took the New Horizon to one of the docking bays. Everyone was excited to be somewhere safe, even for a little while. The Devourers did not attack neutral stations because the traders sold weapons and supplies to anyone who could pay. Even mechanical monsters needed fuel and spare parts. Zareth had not left the ship in months. Walking through the station felt strange after being in the cramped halls of the New Horizon. The corridors were wide and clean, with shops selling food from different worlds and clothes made of fine materials. The air smelled like spices and flowers instead of engine oil and too many people. But the strangest thing was how other aliens looked at her. Word had spread that the last Velnari princess was aboard the human refugee ship. Ambassadors and nobles from other species came to meet her. They bowed low and called her Your Royal Highness, and offered her gifts of gold and jewels. The Thekran Empire would be honored to offer you sanctuary, said Ambassador Vex, a tall alien with green skin and too many eyes. Our Prince Morthan seeks a wife to strengthen our bloodlines. Your royal genetics would be most valuable. Other ambassadors made similar offers. The Zephyrian Confederation wanted her to marry their war leader. The Crystal Syndicate offered her an entire moon if she would bear children for their ruling family. All of them spoke about her like she was a prize to be won, not a person with her own thoughts and feelings. You must consider these offers carefully, said Lord Velthak, one of the few surviving Velnari nobles. He had arrived on the station in a smaller refugee ship. Our people's future depends on your choice. You cannot waste your bloodline on sentiment. Zareth listened to all the offers, but her mind kept thinking about Jake. He was back on the ship, working as always. While alien princes competed for her hand, Jake Morrison fixed broken things with his one arm and never asked for anything in return. The competition for her attention made her uncomfortable. These aliens offered her power and riches, but they looked at her the same way humans looked at rare metals or useful machines. They wanted what she could give them, not who she was. Meanwhile, trouble was growing with the New Horizon. The ship's main communications array had been damaged in the Devourer attack. It was attached to the outside of the ship, in the vacuum of space. Someone would have to go outside in a spacesuit to fix it. The chief engineer, a woman named Karen, studied the problem for hours. It's too dangerous, she told Captain Hayes. The array is in a bad spot, surrounded by sharp metal from the attack. One wrong move and whoever goes out there gets cut in half. Plus the work needs 2 hands to hold things steady while making connections. Can't we get help from the station? Captain Hayes asked. They want too much money. More than we have. And their repair crews are busy with paying customers. That's when Jake stepped forward. I'll do it. Karen laughed, but not in a mean way. Jake, you're missing an arm. This job needs 2 hands. I can do it, Jake said quietly. I've been thinking about the problem. There's a way. Captain Hayes looked doubtful. It's too risky. If something goes wrong out there, we can't help you. If we don't fix the communications, we can't coordinate with the other refugee ships, Jake said. Next time the Devourers attack, we'll be flying blind. More people will die. He was right, and everyone knew it. After much discussion, Captain Hayes agreed to let Jake try. But she insisted that Zareth come back to the ship to help monitor his work from inside. Zareth found Jake in the equipment room, putting on an old spacesuit. It was patched in several places and looked like it had seen better days. The left arm of the suit hung empty and loose. Are you sure about this? She asked him. Jake checked the suit's systems one more time. No, but being sure is a luxury we don't have. He climbed into the airlock and sealed the door behind him. Zareth watched through a small window as the outer door opened and Jake floated out into space. He carried a bag of tools and spare parts, tethered to the ship by a safety line. The communications array was a twisted mess of metal and wires. The Devourer attack had bent it into an almost impossible shape. Jake had to crawl through gaps barely wide enough for his body, dodging sharp edges that could tear his suit open. Zareth watched him work through the cameras mounted on his helmet. With only one arm, Jake had to do everything differently. He used his feet to hold tools while his hand made connections. He wedged himself into tight spaces and used his body weight to bend metal back into shape. When he needed to hold 2 things at once, he found creative ways to use the ship's structure itself as an extra hand. It took him 4 hours to complete repairs that should have been impossible for someone with one arm. He jerry-rigged solutions that no engineer had ever tried before. When a standard tool would not work, he modified it. When the repair manual said something required 2 people, he proved it wrong. Communications array is online. Jake's voice crackled over the radio. Running full diagnostics now. The array worked perfectly. Better than it had before the attack, in fact. Jake had not just fixed it, he had improved it using spare parts and clever modifications. When Jake came back inside, the whole crew was waiting for him. They clapped and cheered like he had just saved the ship single-handed. Which, in a way, he had. Captain Hayes shook his hand. That was incredible work, Jake. I've never seen anything like it. Jake just shrugged in his usual way. Had to be done. But Zareth saw something different in the captain's eyes, and in the eyes of the other crew members. They were looking at Jake with new respect. Not pity for his missing arm, but admiration for what he could do despite it. Later that evening, Zareth sat with Jake in the observation deck, looking out at the space station through the large windows. Ships came and went like fireflies, carrying people and cargo between the stars. The alien ambassadors want to marry me, she told him. Jake was quiet for a long moment. That's probably a good thing. You'd have protection, resources to rebuild your people. They do not want to marry me. They want to marry my bloodline. To them, I am just a breeding animal with royal genetics. And to me, you're just Zara who cleans pipes and fixes water pumps. She looked at him surprised. Is that how you see me? I see you as someone who works hard and treats people well and never complains even when things are bad. Everything else is just details. Zara thought about the alien princes with their offers of planets and power. They promised her a future built on what she was born as. But Jake Morrison, the man everyone said had no future, offered her something different. He saw her for what she chose to be. The other nobles say I should not waste my bloodline on sentiment, she said. Maybe they're right. I can't offer you kingdoms or armies or anything valuable. You offered to die for me when Carl and his friends attacked. You risked your life today to fix our communications. How is that not valuable? Jake smiled, and it was the first time she had seen him look truly happy. I guess it depends on how you measure value. Outside the window, a new ship arrived at the station. It was sleek and beautiful, probably carrying some alien noble who wanted to add Princess Zareth to his collection of valuable things. But sitting there with Jake Morrison, watching him solve impossible problems with quiet determination, Zareth began to understand something important. Having no future meant you were free to create whatever future you wanted, and maybe that was worth more than all the kingdoms in the galaxy. The alarm started screaming 3 days later, while the refugee ships were still docked at Trader's Rest. Everyone thought they were safe at the neutral station, but the Devourers did not care about neutrality anymore. They had grown tired of chasing scattered refugees across the galaxy. Now they wanted to finish what they started. 50 Devourer ships dropped out of hyperspace around the station. They were huge and black, shaped like metal spiders with red lights for eyes. The station's defense systems tried to fight back, but the Devourers tore through them like paper. Explosions lit up the darkness as trader ships tried to escape. All refugee vessels, this is Captain Hayes. The radio crackled. Emergency departure in 10 minutes. Anyone not on board gets left behind. Zareth was in the station's diplomatic quarter when the attack started. The alien ambassadors who had been courting her were running around in panic, trying to reach their own ships. Ambassador Vex grabbed her arm with one of his many hands. Come with us, princess, he said. Our ships are fast. We can escape while the humans fight and die. I will not abandon them, Zareth said, pulling away. Don't be foolish, said another ambassador. Humans are expendable. Your bloodline is not. Think of your duty to your people. But Zareth was already running toward the docking bay where the New Horizon waited. Behind her, she could hear the alien ships powering up their engines, preparing to flee and leave the refugee convoy to face the Devourers alone. She reached the ship just as the docking clamps released. Jake was waiting for her at the airlock. Relief clear on his face when he saw her safe. Thought you might have left with the fancy aliens, he said. Never, she replied. The refugee convoy formed up in space, 30 ships full of people who had nowhere else to go. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had something the Devourers did not expect. They had Zareth. Princess, we need your help, Captain Hayes said over the ship's communication system. You know how these machines think. How do we fight them? Zarath closed her eyes and remembered the battles she had watched from her palace on the homeworld. The Devourers were smart, but they followed patterns. They always attacked the biggest ships first, then worked their way down to the smaller ones. They grouped together when they outnumbered their enemies, believing that overwhelming force was always the answer. They will come at us in 3 waves, she said. First, the capital ships trying to break our formation, then the fighters to pick off damaged vessels. Finally, the harvest ships to collect whatever is left. How do we stop them? Captain Hayes asked. We do not fight their strength. We attack their weakness. Devourers share information through quantum links between their ships. If we can overload one link, it will damage the whole fleet. It was a desperate plan, but it was the only chance they had. The refugee ships spread out in a loose formation, making themselves look weak and scattered. The Devourers took the bait and came charging in exactly as Zarath had predicted. The battle was terrible. Devourer weapons cut through the refugee ships like they were made of paper. The convoy's few fighter pilots tried to defend the transports, but they were overwhelmed quickly. Ship after ship exploded in bright flashes of light. We need someone to get close to their command ship, Captain Hayes said. Close enough to detonate an electromagnetic pulse device. It might disrupt their quantum links. That's a suicide mission, the chief engineer said. Our fighters are all destroyed. We don't have anything that can get through their defenses. We have maintenance pods, Jake said quietly. Everyone looked at him. Maintenance pods were small, unarmed spacecraft used for external repairs. They were slow and fragile, with no weapons or armor. No sane person would try to fight Devourers in a maintenance pod. They're too small for the Devourers to bother shooting at. Jake continued. They'll think it's just debris from a destroyed ship. I can get close enough. It's impossible, Captain Hayes said. Those pods weren't designed for combat flying. And with only one arm, you can't control the systems properly. I can do it, Jake said. I've been modifying the control systems for months, making them work for someone with one hand. Give me the EMP device and I'll get it there. There was no time to argue. The Devourers were closing in for their final attack. Jake climbed into Maintenance Pod 7 and sealed the hatch. Zarath watched through the bay windows as the small craft launched into the battle. The space around them was full of laser fire and explosions. Debris from destroyed ships spun through the darkness like deadly rain. Jake flew the tiny pod through it all, dodging and weaving between the massive Devourer ships. His flying style was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Because he only had one hand, Jake had learned to use his feet and even his shoulder to control different systems. He flew the pod like it was part of his own body, making impossible turns and slipping through gaps that should have been too small. The Devourers ignored him, just as he had predicted. To their sensors, he was just another piece of floating junk. They were focused on destroying the bigger ships, not hunting tiny maintenance pods. Jake reached the Devourer command ship and attached his pod to its hull. He had 30 seconds to set the EMP device before the Devourers realized what was happening. Zarath held her breath as she watched his pod's lights flicker on the enemy ship's dark surface. EMP device armed. Jake's voice crackled over the radio. See you all on the other side. The explosion was bigger than anyone expected. The electromagnetic pulse not only damaged the Devourer command ship, it created a chain reaction through their quantum network. One by one, the mechanical ships began shutting down as their shared consciousness was disrupted. Some Devourers escaped, but most of them drifted powerless in space, their red eyes going dark. The refugee convoy had won, but at a terrible cost. Many ships were destroyed and hundreds of people were dead. Jake's maintenance pod was found 3 hours later, twisted and broken but still intact. Emergency teams cut through the damaged hull and pulled Jake out. He was unconscious and badly hurt, but alive. Zarath stayed by his side in the medical bay while the doctors worked to save him. He had burns from the explosion and several broken bones, but the worst damage was internal. The doctor said he might not wake up. Please, Zarath whispered, holding his remaining hand. You cannot die now. I have something important to tell you. On the 3rd day, Jake's eyes opened. He looked around the medical bay, confused and weak. Did we win? He asked. We won, Zarath said, tears running down her blue cheeks. You saved us all. Jake tried to sit up, but the pain was too much. The convoy? Are they safe? Most of them. The alien ambassadors who wanted to marry me all fled when the fighting started. They took their fast ships and left us to die. But you stayed. You risked everything for people who are not even your species. They're refugees, same as us, Jake said weakly. Didn't matter what species they were. That's when Zareth knew for certain what her heart had been telling her for weeks. She had been offered kingdoms and armies by alien princes who cared only about her bloodline. But Jake Morrison, the man everyone said had no future, had offered her something more valuable than all the wealth in the galaxy. He had offered her himself. I choose you, she said softly. Jake looked confused. What? The aliens wanted to marry me for political alliances. They offered me planets and power and everything a princess should want. But I choose you, Jake Morrison. I choose the man who fixes broken things and stands up for people who cannot defend themselves. I choose the man who flies into battles he cannot win because it is the right thing to do. I can't give you anything, Jake said. I don't have kingdoms or armies or wealth. I'm just a one-armed mechanic with no future. Zareth smiled and squeezed his hand. You gave me the most important thing of all. You showed me that having no future means you are free to build whatever future you choose, and I choose to build mine with you. Outside the medical bay windows, the stars shone bright and steady. Somewhere among them was a world where they could start over, where a broken princess and a one-armed mechanic could prove that the future belonged to those brave enough to reach for it. 6 months later, Jake Morrison stood on a hill overlooking the colony they had built together. The planet was called New Haven, and it was nothing like the worlds either of them had known before. The sky was green instead of blue, and 2 small suns hung overhead like golden coins. Strange plants with purple leaves grew in the valleys below, and the air smelled like cinnamon and rain. The colony itself was a mixture of human and alien technology. Jake had designed buildings that could be put together quickly, using parts from the refugee ships. The structures were not beautiful like the palaces on Zareth's homeworld, or the gleaming cities of Earth, but they were strong and practical and kept the weather out. The water pumps are working again, Zareth said, walking up the hill to join him. She carried a toolbox in 2 of her 4 hands and had grease stains on her work clothes. 6 months of building a colony from nothing had changed her from a princess into someone who knew how to fix things and solve problems. Good, Jake said. The families in Sector 3 were starting to worry. In the distance, they could see children playing in the streets between the buildings. Human children and alien children all mixed together, laughing and running games that would have been impossible on their old worlds. Some had 2 arms, some had 4, some had scales, some had fur, but they were all just kids having fun. Building the colony had not been easy. When the refugee convoy first landed on New Haven, there had been fights between different species. Everyone was scared and angry and tired of running from the devourers. Humans did not trust aliens. Aliens did not trust humans. And nobody trusted anyone who looked different from themselves. But Jake and Zareth had worked together to change that. They showed everyone that different species could help each other instead of fighting. Jake's human creativity combined with Zareth's alien knowledge created solutions that neither could have found alone. When the water recycling systems broke down, Jake figured out how to fix them using Velnari biotechnology that Zareth remembered from her palace. When alien crops would not grow in the strange soil, Zareth suggested mixing them with earth seeds that Jake had brought from his grandmother's garden. The results were plants that grew faster and stronger than either species had ever seen. Word of their success spread through the galaxy. Other refugee ships started coming to New Haven, carrying people who had lost their homes to the devourers or wars or disasters. The colony grew from a few hundred survivors to several thousand people from dozens of different worlds. Jake had become famous without meaning to. Engineers from advanced civilizations came to study his designs and ask how he solved problems with limited resources and only one hand. They called his work impossible engineering and wrote papers about his methods. It's not impossible, Jake would tell them. You just have to think different when you don't have all the tools you want. But the visitors never really understood. They saw Jake's missing arm as a disability to be overcome, not a different way of seeing the world. They tried to copy his designs without understanding that they came from years of learning to work with what he had, instead of wishing for what he did not have. Zareth had also changed. During their time on New Haven, the other Velnari, survivors still called her princess, but she had become something more important. She was a leader who listened to different ideas and found ways to make them work together. Her people's royal bloodline was still valuable for rebuilding their species. But her real worth came from what she chose to do, not what she was born as. Today was special because they were getting married. It had taken months to plan a ceremony that honored both human and Velnari traditions. Representatives from dozens of species had come to watch, including some of the alien ambassadors who had tried to marry Zarath at Trader's Rest. "Are you nervous?" Zarath asked as they walked back toward the colony center. "A little," Jake admitted. "I've never been married in front of 3,000 people before." The ceremony was held in the main square, under the green sky with its 2 golden suns. Captain Hayes performed the human parts of the wedding, while Lord Velthak handled the Velnari traditions. Jake wore his best clean work clothes, and Zarath wore a simple dress she had made herself from fabric traded with passing merchants. They exchanged rings made from metal salvaged from their old ships. Jake's ring was carved with Velnari symbols that meant strength through adaptation. Zarath's ring had human words that said, "Love finds a way." When it came time for the vows, Jake spoke first. "I promise to fix what is broken and build what is needed," he said. "I promise to stand with you when things are hard and celebrate with you when they are good. I promise to see you for who you choose to be, not what others expect you to be." Zarath's vows were longer and more formal, as was the Velnari way. But at the end, she added something in simple human words. "I choose you, Jake Morrison. I choose the future we will build together, whatever that future brings." The crowd cheered in dozens of different languages. Humans clapped their hands, Velnari sang in harmony, and other aliens made noises that meant happiness in their cultures. Children threw flower petals that sparkled in the light of the twin suns. After the ceremony, there was a party that lasted until both suns set. People shared food from their homeworlds and told stories about the places they had lost. But instead of being sad about the past, they talked about the future they were building together. Ambassador Vex, who had once offered Zarath a place in the Tekron Empire, came to congratulate them. "I must admit, Princess, I did not understand your choice at first," he said. "My people value genetic purity and political power. But watching your colony succeed has taught me something new. Sometimes the strongest alliances come from shared purpose, not shared blood." "Jake taught me that," Zarath said. "Humans measure worth differently than most species. They care more about what you do than where you come from." As the party wound down, Jake and Zarath climbed back up the hill where they had stood that morning. The colony spread out below them, lights twinkling in the windows of 1,000 homes. Ships moved in the sky overhead, bringing new refugees and taking messages to other worlds. "Do you ever miss your old life?" Jake asked. "Being a princess with servants and palaces and everything you wanted?" Zarath thought about it seriously. "I miss some things. My parents, my homeworld, the beauty of the royal gardens. But I do not miss being helpless. I do not miss having my future decided for me by others. And I don't miss being told I'm useless because I'm different," Jake said. "Here, being different is just another way to solve problems." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear in the green sky. Somewhere out there, the Devourers were still hunting the last survivors of 100 civilizations. The galaxy was full of pain and loss and darkness. But here on New Haven, under strange stars and an alien sky, 2 people who had lost everything had found something better. They had found each other. And together they had built a place where different species could work side by side, where children could play in safety, where the future belonged to anyone brave enough to reach for it. Jake Morrison had been a failed pilot with 1 arm and no prospects. Princess Zarath had been the last heir of a dead empire with impossible responsibilities. But together, they had become something neither could have been alone. They had become hope. And in a galaxy full of darkness, hope was the most valuable thing of all.